The topic is macros. A macro is a pre-recorded set of keystrokes that can be played back. No different than recording music, for example. You turn on the record button, you sing or play an instrument, you stop recording, you play it back as many times as you want. The only difference with a macro is when it plays back very, very quickly. So it might have taken you 10 minutes to record the macro, but it will play back in 10 seconds. And why would you bother to do that? Well, for two reasons. Number one, if you're doing the same keystrokes all the time, repetitively, it's worth your while to record them and then just have Excel play it back. Saves you time. The other reason is when you're doing something for someone else. So you're creating commands, functions, and the user simply has to run the macro or click on a button for something to happen. So before we begin, you have to add the Developer tab into your Excel ribbon. And you only have to do this once. To do that, you click File, and you go to File Options, and you click on Customize Ribbon, and you make sure there is a check mark next to Developer. And that puts the Developer tab into the ribbon. Now, I'll give you examples of two macros, two very simple recordings. One is to sort by salary, and the other is to sort by ID. So the first thing you do is go to the Developer tab and click Record Macro, and give your macro a descriptive name without spaces. So you need to know what this macro is going to do. So I'm going to sort by salary, for example, and click OK. Now you are in record mode. Everything you do from this point forward is going to be recorded. Now, you're not seeing any visual cues here, so you have to remember that you're recording. And on the Developer ribbon, where it says, now it says stop recording. So that's really your visual cue that you are in record mode. And one problem some people have is they forget to stop recording. So you have to remember to stop. So now what do you want to do? You want to sort by salary. So the most important first step in recording a macro is the go to command. Like you have to go to a cell that is your starting point for what you want to do next. So you have to record that action. So if I want to sort by salary, I'm going to click on one of the salary cells, one of the numbers in the salary column. It doesn't matter which one, but I need to record that action to go to a specific cell, which will become my starting point for what I want to do next. So now I can click Data, and I can just do a simple A to Z or Z to A because it's a one-level sort. So I'll do it in descending order. The sort happens, it works. Now I move to my home position to A1 and stop recording. Next, I'll do another recording that will return my data to its original configuration. So now I want to sort back to ID. So begin again, Developer, record macro, give it a descriptive name. So this would be sort by ID. Click OK. Now you're in record mode. Now you select your starting position, which will be any cell in the ID column. And now you can do the sort data, and we'll sort A to Z. And that brings this data back to the way it was originally input, sorted by ID. Developer, stop recording. Now we're going to assign those macros to buttons. So the user simply has to click on a button for the sorts to happen. And again, that comes from the Developer tab. Click Insert Form Control. The very first one is called a button, Form Control. Click and then draw a button. It doesn't, not too big, but above the table, okay, not beside it, not below it, above it. And now you attach that button to one of the two macros you created. And now this becomes obvious that the names of the macros are important because you need to know what this button is going to do. So we'll do sort by salary first, and then carefully with your mouse, click inside the button, delete the label, and replace it with what this button is going to do. So sort by salary. While you're here, you can adjust the size of the button if you need to. And when you're done, just click away. But don't click on the button yet. Let's create another button right below it. And we'll attach this button to sort by ID. And again, carefully go inside, delete what's there, sort by ID, and click away. Usually when you record macros, you record them in pairs, right? One button does something and the button below it undoes something. So let's check to see if it works. Sort by salary, yes, the highest salary is on top. Sort by ID, yes. And it doesn't matter where your active cell is prior to clicking on the button because you've recorded the first action to select a cell. So your macro will work regardless of the starting position of your active cell. If you get an error message, something about debugging, what you do is from the developer tab, you go to the macros, you select the macro that doesn't work and you delete it and you start all over again. To delete just the button, you right-click the button and cut it out. Okay, so if you need to delete the button, right-click and cut it. If you need to delete the actual macro, you go into the macros and you select the macro that doesn't work and you delete it and you start again. All right, now let me give you another example. This time I'll do a macro that's going to do an advanced filter. Before I record, I'm going to set up my criteria for my filter. Again, at the top, above my data. So my criteria, let's say I'm going to copy. That'll be my criteria. Location equals Mississauga. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to put that up here, paste it up here. So that's a criteria, a simple criteria that says, show me only location equals Mississauga. Now I'm going to record the macro to run the advanced filter. So developer, record macro, give it a name. So I'll call without a space, advanced filter, okay. Now I run an advanced filter. So I do that by selecting a single cell in my table, my data table, data, advanced. Excel should properly guess where your table range is, and it does. So now all you have to do is select the location of the criteria that you previously entered. Click OK, and now you can see that only location Mississauga is visible. So your advanced filter worked. Go back to your home position and stop recording. And the matching macro for this would be to clear the advanced filter, bring it back to the data back to its original configuration. So our next macro, record macro, will be remove filter. This, something like that. The actual words don't matter as long as you understand what the macro is going to do. Okay, we're now in record mode. Click in any cell inside of your results, go to data and click clear. And that removes the advanced filter, move back to the home position and stop recording. And now let's create the two buttons like we did before. And one up here, we attach it to the advanced filter and carefully change the label, delete that, say advanced filter. And then the add button underneath it to remove the filter. To remove the filter, change the label. Remove filter. Okay, now we can test to see if our macros work. Advanced filter, yes, it works. Remove filter, yes, it works. Now, one more thing I want to teach you. Sometimes it's really useful to pause the macro and ask the user for specific information. Like you might need that information because it's constantly changing. For example, the date. You might pause the macro and ask the user to put in today's date. Or you might pause the macro and ask for a specific number or a specific word or enter your name. So what we need to do is edit one of the macros, and we're going to insert these 2 lines of code that I've given you here in cells F6 and F7. This is called VBA, Visual Basic Programming Code. And all you have to know is to copy this code, put it into the macro in the right spot, and we'll do a little editing, and I'll show you what that does. So let me show you how you would enter this input box into your existing macro. So you need an existing macro, and then you're supposed to edit that macro. So go to developer, go to macros, and what we're going to do is this advanced filter macro, we're going to edit it. When you click edit, that opens up a new window on your screen, and this is your Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. So this is the code that is recorded as you press the keystrokes in Excel. So unless you're quite familiar with the code, it's actually pretty confusing to edit. However, this is the name of the macro we want to edit. We're going to click just before the first word that shows up that's in black. And what we're going to do right here, press the enter key, and then just move your cursor right above it. That's the location where you're going to copy and paste the code that I gave you from the Excel worksheet. So now I'm going to copy these 2 cells, F6, F7, copy, put them into memory, move back to my VBA screen, and then Control V to paste those 2 lines of code at the beginning of the advanced filter macro. You just want to make sure that when the code is pasted, it shows up in black, not in green, because this is the green words are just labels, so they don't do anything. So if your code shows up in black, that's part of the macro, so that's what you want. Now you have to do 2 things. You're going to change the cell reference, because that's just an example, and then you're going to replace the question marks. Okay, so for this macro, we want the macro to pause where? Over here in E2, because we want the user to enter a location into cell E2, and then the advanced filter will continue. So we're pausing at cell E2, not B5, E2. So we're changing that to E2, and we're replacing the check marks, question marks with what to enter. So enter location, and then click OK. And when you close this window, everything's automatically saved, and the macros will be saved with your file. So now let's see if it works. Now when I click on the advanced filter button, that's an input box. That's the first thing that pops up, and it says enter location, and then click OK or press enter. So notice how your cursor is now, your active cell is in cell E2. So now I'll just type in Toronto, click OK, and the rest of my advanced filter command happens. And now I can simply view all the IDs in the Toronto location. I can now remove my filter and bring it back, and I can run the advanced filter again. Stops at E2, asks for a location. I have to spell it right in order for it to work. No spelling mistakes allowed here. And so on. So an input box simply allows the macro to pause and waits for a user to enter something into the cell that you have selected. So remember to do that. Change the B5 to whatever cell works for your situation. Now, just to finalize this topic, macros cannot be undone. So once you click on a button, you cannot undo what you've done. It's not possible. So be careful. When you're learning how to use macros, you should always save your file first and then click on the button to test it. Because if it doesn't work and something happens to your data table, you cannot undo it. So then you can simply close your file, reopen the file you just saved, and try it again. So be very careful with that. And lastly, to save the macro, your file must be saved as a macro-enabled file. So where it says save as type, you have to change that to Excel macro-enabled workbook. So the file extension will change to XLSM. If you don't do that, then none of the macros are saved. The buttons will be there, but none of the buttons will work because the instructions, the behind the scenes macro, will not be saved unless you save your normal Excel file as a macro-enabled workbook. And that concludes the topic on macros.